should be good to go. I don't believe it's muted. Okay. Already said so. Whenever you're ready, I can do the live one. Okay, yeah, I would give her like a couple minutes. Yeah. And you're live together. Cool. Perfect. Yeah. Hello. Those of you in the back, there's 2 empty seats here, not on the front row. You're not going to leave this lecture, so come on down. Oh, Chunkin. It's like a 4-hour lecture, but you're going to be so riveted. Yeah, there's 2 here. There's 1 here. There's about 6 or 7 down here on the front row, which is going to be a way better view than from behind the projection booth. So come on down, Chachi, come on down. Those of you up there in the corner. No, those are saved. Yeah. And there's 1 here. There's one here. Ashley, Michael Ross. Those of you, sorry, partial view there. I mistook Ashley and okay, I know this is good, huh? Let's see, we got 3 down low. And still 2 there, which are and 1 here. Very respectable seats, not on the front row. I know how that is for some of you. But come on down. If I look up there long enough, peer pressure will kick in. David's desperately trying to avoid me looking at him. Oh, here he comes. Yeah, Scotty and Poppy are there. Yeah. There are 2 seats down here next to Professor Marlene Davis and Professor Patrick Keogh. I can't think of 2 better professors to sit next to in empty seats in such a prime location. Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here. Super excited about today, and been looking forward to this for quite a while, really, since Sandy agreed to this crazy idea. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jason Young. I'm the Dean of the College of Architecture and Design, and so happy that you all are here. I get the honor of introducing the tonight's lecturer, the 2024 General Shale lecturer, but also to talk a little bit about General Shale and our partnership with them, which we're really proud of. So the lecture this evening wouldn't be possible without our longtime industry partner, General Shale. General Shale's helped us bring leading lecturers to Knoxville. They often donate building materials for design build projects, and they sponsor generous scholarships and support other student awards in our college. General Shale's one of North America's largest manufacturers of brick, stone, and concrete block for residential, commercial, and specialty architectural projects, and the college's longest committed partner. So really, from the beginning of the history of the School of Architecture, General Shale, in one way or another, has been involved. Since 1980, General Shale's contributed significantly to support the college. Their interests in innovation, energy efficiency, and lasting beauty overlap with our commitment to collaboration, sustainability, and providing our students with a materially authentic design education. With the company's support, we've been able to host a number of global practitioners, including Tom Main, Juhani Palasma, Craig Dykers, Kazuyo Sejima, and Marlon Blackwell, just to name a few. Tonight we add Sandy Attia of MoDusArchitects to the stellar list of contemporary designers whose work is redefining the profession of architecture. General Shale supports our students directly through the General Shale Scholarship Endowment and other awards. And when the need arises, General Shale even provides craftspeople to teach our students the fine art of laying brick, as they did for our award-winning Beardsley Farm educational building design build, as well as the new Norris House award-winning project, and other projects throughout the history of the college. In the fall, we had an event in Johnson City at General Shale's headquarters, wherein a number of college faculty presented a lightning talk on their materially engaged research agendas. That event has set up the possibility for a new dimension to the long-standing partnership between our college and General Shale, wherein we look for synergies between their company ethos and that of the college. With a shared commitment to sustainability and advanced manufacturing, we believe our partnership is at the cusp of its next era. We're excited for what the future of this relationship will bring to both our faculty research and the impact that research has on the experience of our students. And I'm happy to extend a warm welcome to folks from General Shale who've traveled here for this tonight for this lecture. Andy Hall, just raise your hand. Andy is the Chief Operating Officer. Corky Clifton, Vice President of Sales. Mike Hillman, who's the National Director of Retail Sales and a member of the Dean's Advocacy Board, so thank you for that. Mike, you make a huge difference in that capacity for us. David Gilmore, National Director of Commercial Sales. Steve Samsel, District Sales Manager for Knoxville. And Josh Brock, Architectural Sales Representative for Knoxville. So please join me with a round of applause to thank them for their partnership. So now it's my honor to introduce tonight's lecturer, Sandy Attia. So Sandy was born in Cairo, Egypt, grew up in Kuwait, and immigrated to the United States when she was in high school, along with her brother and her parents, and attended architectural education here in the States. So she she studied at University of Virginia for her undergrad, and then went to the Harvard GSD for a Master of Architecture. While at the GSD, Sandy met Matteo Scagnol, who is now her life partner and also business partner, and they opened in the year 2000 MoDusArchitects. They work in a region in northern Italy that is deeply impacted by a kind of confluence of cultures, Germanic cultures, Italian cultures. It's right on the cusp of the Alps. It has a lot of influence from Austria And they bring their varied background. Matteo's an Italian, and they bring their very varied background and culture to bear on the work that they do in a region that also has an amazing kind of crucible of hybridized culture. So we're very happy to have Sandy here. Sandy was the Muschenheim Fellow at the University of Michigan some 20 or so years ago, and that's where we met. And when we had the opportunity to be colleagues, and for one semester also we're teaching partners, which was an amazing experience. And since that time, and I'll say a little bit more about our fellowship project, but since that time, I really have followed Sandy and Matteo's work and just thought that it's absolutely stunning work. And they're starting to get some amazing accolades. So they have won the 2013 Piranesi Award, an award that I would really love to win, the Piranesi Award. First prize for the Ordezzo Awards in 2014. Their work's been nominated for the Mies van der Rohe Prize for European Architecture in 2015, 2021, and 2024. There are really too many awards to list, but I will just kind of summarize it by saying this, that in the last 9 years, there are over 20 prominent, important award recognitions for the firm. So this is definitely an opportunity for us to see a practice that has, as I said, redefined the profession, but also will go on to do much, much more. The first book on the work of MoDusArchitects, entitled Three of a Kind, was published by the Architecture Observer Press in 2014. Of the numerous educational projects completed to date, many have received awards both in Italy and abroad, placing MoDusArchitects at the center of the current debate on the government school building program underway in Italy. And that's for me, one of the rare aspects here of the practice is that it really does bring together complex social program with an incredible material agenda and research into the tectonic aspect of architecture. Her latest co-authored book, Designing Schools, really benefits from the amount of work that they've done and the thinking they've done around the educational programming. And that book was shortlisted in 2015 for a National Research Award in the field of architecture, and her cross-disciplinary work in creative and educational environments continues with her involvement with the Agnelli Foundation in Torino, Italy. So as I was saying, Sandy received the Muschenheim Fellowship, and in that context, we were colleagues, and the important thing about that fellowship for, we have a similar fellowship program here, is that Sandy did a research project on brick. And we've been going down memory lane a little bit in the last few days, and so I looked up, anxious to kind of embarrass her with what she had written 20 years ago, but it wasn't published. But what was published, and I think more to the point of this introduction, were a series of really astute photographs of the process of how bricks are made. So she did extensive research in a brick company in the Midwest, just looking at the manufacturing process, where the raw materials are sourced, what the process of the kind of labor process is for production and distribution of the brick. And this work, to me, is like essential for, even if she feels at a distance to that, essential to how I think it is that the work of MoDusArchitects can be understood, is that how a building material is made can deeply influence, and where it comes from can deeply influence how you make architecture and design out of that material. So she also took the gallery in the school and completely clad it in brick. Do you remember this? I think we had some of the structural engineer faculty a little bit worried about whether the slab could take that load, but she made the point it's a distributed load, not a point load, so it should be fine. So, but completely rearranged the gallery, and I think that's important as well, because it was a space like the spaces we have here in our college that everyone was familiar with. Many shows had been in that space. Many shows since then have been in that space. But she completely defamiliarized it by bringing the material brick to bear on this. And I really believe that that work that she did is literally and metaphorically foundational to the work that we're going to see today. And it's great to see. So she's also taught at Princeton University, at the University of Virginia, Trento University, and other schools of architecture in Italy. So She has a commitment to education, but also really first and foremost, I think a commitment to practice. In 2013, Sandy was nominated for the Arc Vision Prize along with 25 other women from across the world for her contribution to the field of architecture. She blends a strong commitment to creativity with an astute ability to read the landscape, territory, and region. She's excited by the technical dimensions of architecture. These are my thoughts on you, Sandy. But also equally motivated to understand the cultural and social aspects of program and use in the built environment. And I really believe that that Sandy is kind of the total package architect. And if you were following my my advertisements yesterday for this lecture, students, you would have seen that in each and every image there was just something fundamental and carried through to like a high level of precision and comprehensive carry through. Whether that was looking at the working of geometry in the plan, right? Some of us older folks worry that that might be an art that we're losing as architecture becomes more and more complex. Wow, this has gone on a little too long. At any rate, super happy to introduce Sandy Attia, MoDusArchitects. Thank you, Sandy, for being here. Sandy is spending the week with us, and we're so glad you're here. So join me in welcoming Sandy Attia.
Can you hear me? Okay. So total package. I'm not. That's okay. We'll see about that. Let's try and do that. So yes, Dean Young, thank you for this very, very, very generous introduction, and thank you to all of those who have included me in your daily activities, meals, pinups, desk grits. And I've truly never felt this welcome before at an institution, so I feel extremely honored and very grateful and feel very lucky to have met you and to share our work with you today. So I practice architecture in a way that I do today by way of a series of non-linear kind of sum of encounters and events and travels and studies and sort of serendipitous incidents. So as you have heard, one such event was when I was a Musenheim Fellow, so a teaching research fellow at the University of Michigan. And like Jason said, my application was based on the use of brick in architecture, and it was something, though, a little bit more specific about it. And I was interested in the use of brick in such a way that it was only brick. So when you looked at it, it looked like it was just made out of brick, or it looked to seem as though it was only made out of brick. So I wanted to understand, how, technically how that was done, and why that was an important kind of message to get out there when you're building in brick. So, so I traveled to see, during my time there, I traveled to see examples of all brick buildings. And I spoke with architects who designed brick buildings. I studied the work of course, Sigurd Leverance, and I studied the work of Eladio Dieste. I interviewed a number of architects. One was Nader Tehrani. He was my ex-office da, or Nada now, and he was my thesis advisor. Mario Boda, who's really out of fashion, but he's done a lot of brick buildings. Baumschlager Eberle, Massimo Carmassi, he's an architect in Italy that nobody knows about, but he's phenomenal, and he builds only in brick. And I visited a number of beautiful architectural examples of brick buildings. I had seen the Grundtvig church during my undergrad semester abroad in Copenhagen, where I suppose I had what you would call like this religious architectural experience, and it really touched me, this space, in a way that I'll never forget. So there's all these things that just these experiences as you go abroad on, to Helsinki and so on and so forth. You see these buildings, and maybe you're not quite sure what it is about them that has somehow truly touched you. But this was one of them, and I taught a studio while I was at Michigan. After the Muschenheim Fellowship, I stayed on, and I taught a studio where I had students designing their own bricks and proposing an architecture that used that brick as the module to kind of generate a new, you always think you're generating a new architecture. And it wasn't terribly successful, of course, because bricks as they are, they're perfect. They're simple, one on top of the other one. And then out of that simplicity, you can create some very complex textures and forms, and not only complex, but actually very poetic at the same time. So, where did all of this brick come from? Matteo and I certainly don't only build in brick. And in the year 2000, upon finishing my master's, I won a travel fellowship from the school, and my travel research proposal was on, I don't remember the exact title. I was looking for it. I couldn't find it, of course. I seem to have lost parts of my past, but it was about mono-material architecture, on the singular use of a particular material to make an architecture that when you looked at it, it said stone, it said wood, concrete, brick. It didn't really matter, but there was something about that singular, obsessive use of that one material, how you could make that happen. So I visited the Stonehenge in England, the Escorial in Spain. Zumthor has this little precious, very beautiful wooden chapel that I went to go see in Switzerland, and there were so many other places. And these travels were subsequent to my travels to Egypt, visiting Luxor for my graduate thesis project. And Luxor is where, among many beautiful temples, there's the Queen Hatshepsut temple. And it's, like you see here, it's a stone, all stone, terraced, a monumental structure made out of the stone, into which it's carved, and where on the day of winter solstice, a ray of light casts through this little square hole light into the innermost sanctuary, and it kind of have this incredible connection of, the celestial space with the ground, and the frame for all of this of nature and artifice is architecture. And so for me, it was this incredible moment of just sheer beauty. And so I saw that the singular approach to using one material is what, or my reading of it, is what breathed life into the building when you would maybe think the opposite. It's kind of overkill, you're always using the same material. And so there was something about being enveloped in that space, kind of like in the Grundtvig Church, that you have no question about where you are, because you're enveloped in this singular kind of space. So its materiality was its DNA. Its genetic makeup, of course, carries with it centuries of building traditions, but it also defines the architecture, I would call it its persona, its features, and it ultimately inscribes the material essence into our very lives. So I find that I gravitate towards architecture that feels rooted of its place. They make me feel anchored, but at the same time, they make me also lose a sense of time. There's that sense of timelessness. And so that sense of timelessness, they gain a kind of autonomy through their material presence that detaches itself from actually the place in which they're located. And that's what's something that it remains with you through time. So all of these things are what I find really beautiful about a material interest in architecture. So, of course, we're not living in ancient times, and we don't build with only one kind of material. Matteo and I, as you've heard, we practice in northern Italy, in the Alpine region of South Tyrol, where buildings are made of like the highest standards to keep out the cold and stave off the heat. And to do all of that, we use all kinds of insulation types, water sheathing, vapor barriers, PVC piping, and, stratified layers, and, a very far cry from that kind of essential archetypal architecture that Matteo and I both love. What we do have, however, working in South Tyrol is access to buildings know-how, along with access to a very high level of craftsmanship. So our work really sits on the shoulders of the people who build it. And I can't stress this point enough. So having a partnership with someone who's from the industry, really knows what they're talking about, that's something for us that has brought us to where we are today, because we live in a context where there's a lot of really amazing things that are going on. So, but it's the building themselves also. We tend to go, we work very locally, so we tend to go back to our buildings like they're old friends. You kind of like check in on them and you see what happened, and we see from the buildings themselves the lives that they've taken on and how their skins have weathered and how their inhabitants have appropriated the spaces to make them their own. But also how these buildings are starting points for other endeavors, at times catalysts for change, spaces for unforeseen, unimagined programs that you hadn't, kind of designed for. So one of the first projects that we built was a house for an artist. And I thought it would be interesting to start here, because this house is one of those old friends that has never gone away. And the program, a house for an artist, so he wants a house and he wants a place to work. And the interesting thing about this was the client, because he lives in this he literally lives in this picture-perfect town. And he was really disturbed by the mayor, who only passed projects that looked like they were part of, the Alpine tradition, and there was nothing modern. He's a contemporary artist, and so he really wanted to build a house that was critical of that. So that's a very particular kind of position that he had. We, on the other hand, when we started thinking about the project, we were interested in this idea of these houses that you see kind of dotting the landscape, and we call them twins. So maybe they're the farmhouse and the stall, the barn, and usually they're separate buildings. And there's this one building in particular that it's like a kind of Siamese twin building. And so that as a concept was something that we were interested in. We started looking at the vernacular architecture. The vernacular architecture has these big billowing wooden roofs, and they have generally rock or masonry walls. And so we kind of sketched on top of them, and we're like, oh, okay, we want a timber billowing roof. And at the same time, we want to create this connection to the sky through our roof, but we also want to be very grounded. So these are very, naive kind of sketches, but this is how we were working, and we built this model in the first few days when we started thinking about the project, and we didn't have a plan, and I mean a literal plan, architectural plan drawing. We didn't know how the program was going to come together, and sometimes this is something that I think is really helpful for us. You jump into a part of your project and you go and you're like, that's their building, that's what it's going to be like, but you actually don't have anything resolved whatsoever. And so from there we started working. We work a lot in little models that are just about form making and trying to figure out how these two volumes come together. It's made out of insulation, and you just cut it with a knife and with a cutter, and it's really fast. You can make these models in 5 minutes, and then you move on to a larger scale and you kind of mock it up, and then you come up, okay, so how can this become a kind of architecture? And so you don't only have your architecture, but you have these mountains. When you're in South Tyrol, it's like you have these mountains. They don't ever leave you. They're huge present. There's a huge presence. And so when you're working on a small project, how is it that you're able to be in dialogue with this incredible landscape around you, but at the same time, you're just building a house. Okay, so there's this domestic quality to it, and this is something that we're often interested in. There's, the hillside and then the valley side. Do you say that? Yeah. And there's always these two different relationships to your topography that create two different scales just because of their relationship to the topography. So you have the smaller scale, and then you have the bigger scale just because of the topography change. And so here you see the house, which is dealing with this idea of the plinth that is the kind of datum. It's the connection to the ground. Wood doesn't like ground. Wood and water, they don't go well together. So that's a problem. How do you make it? It's not a tree that comes out of the ground. You have to make a kind of degree of separation. So you see that this house here, it's an extension to his family house, so he could build really close. So you see that here in plan. It kind of V's out towards the landscape. And you see this here in this construction image that you see just the two plinths that take that kind of groundscape and define that bottom level that I was talking about, that masonry level of the vernacular house. And this house has at its core a concrete stair that then you follow up, and that's the structural core of this house. And these are some of the drawings that started to talk about, how you try to fit these two volumes together with this kind of spiral stair in the middle. We were looking a lot at Kahn's, I'm blanking out, Fisher House, just to see, some of that resolution in plan. I'm a plan drawer. I love drawing plans. So here you see how you come down the ramp. This is the existing house, and you have this stair in the center, and you have just these two open studio spaces. There's a wood shop, and then there's a mock-up gallery space. And you go up, and the footprint is much smaller. And when you enter into the house, when you go, there's a kind of portico, and you enter into the house here. There's an office, and then you can go up or down. And this is a double-height empty space. And as you go up, you end up in the stair. You end up here, and this is the living level. The living room, their private, their master bathroom and bath, and then there's the kitchen. And what you see here, there's one stair, and then there's another stair. And what's interesting about this house, it's not that big, but when you go up upstairs, you can't communicate to each other because you're in two separate volumes that you can't. You have to go down the stairs to get there. So you see that here. In section, this idea of the ground is here, it's in concrete, and then the wood structure starts, and then all of this is in wood. So it's CLT, and then light frame roof structure, and light frame walls. So this is an unfolded facade, and the client was really, his name's Hubert. Hubert was really concerned about this relationship between structure and skin, and he wanted to make sure that structure was structure and skin was skin, and was explicitly so in the project. And we were saying, this is actually a really big topic in architecture, and it's something that you can actually be a little bit playful, and you can be gestural with what structure is, and you're not quite sure where it sits. So we had all these kind of conversations with him about it, but structurally, this house is held up by the V timber elements, and so if you take a chainsaw around this house, it's just going to collapse. So this kind of fragility of the house was something that he was very anxious about. He was anxious about it, but he was very interested in how wood can be fragile, and it would take just a few cuts, and his whole house would fall down. And this idea of a house that you had to take care of it, that it kind of had to react to these mountains around in this kind of microclimate. We'll see a little bit further that this material wood was kind of something to be reckoned with. So you see him here on the right. He followed obsessively the construction site. So you hear the CLT, the walls coming in, the main beams, and we're going up into the bedroom now. And you see here how we started cladding it, and the structure is pulled up into the facade and gives a kind of texture, breaking up the facade in different ways. So these are the feet of the building. So they're all pre-cut, and they have these feet that separate it from the concrete. And this is a really important detail because otherwise, the water starts creeping up into the wood, and that creates all kinds of problems. And there is a problem here with this V, so the water is going to collect at that point, and it's going to sit there, and you don't want water to sit on wood. You always want it to be able to dry out and breathe and give it a kind of, make sure that water isn't still on it. So we didn't think about that, but he, and we'll come back to that, but he wanted to make sure that his wood was untreated and that this building was going to get old as he got old. So that was something that he was very explicit about. So a lot of these images that you see are images that are when it's all, brand new and shiny. And then we'll see some images later as we go on. Here we're looking down. We went into that porch area. We're looking down into his north-facing studio space. There's a kind of like a peristyle. There's a walk all the way around this house, and you can just fall off. You know, it's not, there's no hand railing. You could just fall off this house. So he had kids and he put gates up, but he didn't put a handrail all the way around this house. So the idea of kind of, you know, this house is kind of on the edge. You know, it's like not quite up to code, let's say. And so there's this idea though, like you're at one side of the house and you look through this kind of forest of columns and you look to the other side of the house, and it creates an incredible sense of open. Your house all of a sudden seems much bigger because you're from one point looking through from an indoor, outdoor, indoor, and that was something we were always talking about. So you're indoor and you're looking outdoor, you can see people then walking around, and you can see into other spaces, and here you see that central core of the concrete stair, and that's this enveloping space, you know, all concrete, and you come up, and it's very clear, okay, this is where the concrete stops, and then this is where my wooden structure begins. And everything about this house, the points where we had to have a few metal structural elements, we revealed them. So that we didn't try and, you know, mask them, we revealed them. That was something that was really important in this kind of discussion of, you know, where material, their honesty is and what it is that they're doing. All the lights, they're kind of etched in, the kind of guts of the house. They have a way in which they're embedded within the wood, within the wood. So really rethinking all of the, you know, electrical and mechanical systems of the house. All of the furniture we designed all of the furniture. It's all industry grade wood, more or less. And so different ways that you look at the grain, the different textures, the handles on these furniture pieces, having kind of fun that you pull the fabric around as if it's behind these metal elements. Here were a few images of the spaces. And then there's this one thing here where he drew, which is the shadow that this handrail casts on winter solstice. And I thought, oh gosh, it's so poetic, you know, what do we think? And why did he do it? Because he was paranoid that his house was going to settle and it was going to move. And so the only way that he was going to check on it is that if the shadow didn't fill in the profile. So here, and we're going to get back to this. So then here we're up into the bedroom. So you're on one to the other, and they're not communicating. So you would be in this space here or on the other side, and you're in two separate volumes. He even tattooed the plan on the facade. So send us these videos. So you can see the facade is really weathered. It's getting black. And he said, it's his punctuation, it's not mine. I translated here. It's a phenomenon that lasts just a few minutes. The morning after heavy rains, when the sun rises and hits the wood in autumn. This is what's up. Okay, I'm an addict. We do everything to what's up. And so there's something about when he sent us these images, this idea that the material, the humidity, the way that light hits, this building is breathing because wood is still alive after you cut it down. You know, you still, sometimes the sap is still coming out of the wood years later. And so that idea that the materiality gives the building a life is something that I'm really interested in. So this idea of the life of buildings, it's not only the life of buildings contained within it, but it's how the materiality actually gives the building it's like a breathing body. And one of the unfortunate things are a few windows that leaked. And this became a real problem, of course, north-facing. And, we tried to fix it. We worked with a window company, and we said, we just think you need to put a hat on it. And so we sent him the sketch, and he said, oh, a hat. And so he made it. This was all within a few hours. So he made a hat, and he put it on. He's like, oh, so do you mean like that? And we said, yes. And so then we put the hat on, and I had the building, and so the windows cry now. So it's the building breathes, it cries, and it really takes on, the kind of, all the natural elements, and it embodies all the things that you're trying not to do, not to breathe. You don't want, air to get in or out. You don't want it to cry. You want to keep it sealed. And so there's something about this project that has really gotten me to start thinking about the relationship of materiality to the life of the building itself. And he sent this to me on December 20th. It's not a joke, and this is his, and so I was like, well, thank God it hasn't moved, so. So anyway, this idea about materiality and its fragility and its imperfections, and that's what gives it a kind of poetry, is something that we struggle with, because on the one hand, the last thing you want to hear is from your client calling you up that your window's leaking, and that's just not good news. But, this idea that there's always a way in which you can keep working, it's a work in progress, you can keep working on your project and kind of embrace it as an opportunity to take that as a design problem. One thing, there's this book I love, it's by Bruno Munari. He has a number of them drawing suns or trees, and this one is drawing a tree, drawing trees. And so in this one, you learn in school, like you draw the perfect tree and it's standing up straight and this image here, but actually trees are never perfect because, if you just go down Highway 101 on the West Coast, you see sometimes, depending on where they are, if they're closer to the cliffside or if they're more inward, more inland, then depending on how the wind is, they might be, almost touching the ground with the force of the wind. So you have the same seed, it's the same species, and just depending on where that seed landed from one side of the street to the other, then that's gonna create a completely different shape of your tree. And that's something I find really intriguing. It's just how you land on a certain kind of project and what you do with that material, even though it might be the same material that you're working with from one project to another. It's really infinite, the amount of possibilities that you can do. And one thing that I started looking at, thinking about in this project, there were 3 projects that we did together, all at the same time, all in wood. And this idea of this single element that's actually very fragile. Richard Long, he's a British land artist, and this isn't his best installation, but it's something that for me, I saw one of these installations and I found it very powerful. These very, he goes on these walks and he collects these items from these little twigs from his walk, and he composes them together. And out of these little fragile twigs that you might be stepping and crushing on, he pulls them together in this single line, and it seems like it has a kind of gravitas to it. It's all the same, and it forms a beautiful shape. And so that's something that we were thinking about when we were called to work on this project for a wood industry business where they buy and sell wood. They also do prefabricated houses, and they wanted to expand their offices and their production facility. And so they held a competition, and we won the competition because, first of all, the building was undoubtedly in wood. So when you saw it, you thought wood. And the other thing was that the competition brief said, okay, you have these offices and admin programs, and then at the top you're going to get to the showroom. And in that showroom, we're going to put, the sandwich in plexi, and you're going to see the stratification of the different kinds of wood, vertical and horizontal systems. And so we thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. What would happen if the facade is working with a kind of rethinking the way that you can think of a wood building, and working with these singular elements that this is the unfolded facade, and then on top are these kind of brise-soleil elements that, and this house is located, this is Bressanone, and this is the light industrial area. And so it's smack in the middle here, kind of a really ugly context along the river. And we said, okay, let's work with a wooden cube that has a kind of bark to it, like tree bark, and it had a kind of thickness to it. And that thickness, it was just as irregular and rough, so you could really kind of, a lot of times when we were starting out working with wood, the buildings tended to be, there's a kind of flatness to it, and so we're trying to push back on, that flatness of wood. and working with something along the street facade that was kind of enigmatic. It was like this wooden box that sat in among the stockpile yard of all the wood. And of course, you have that base in concrete, because wood doesn't like touch the ground. It's a real problem. It's a very difficult kind of detail to resolve. And so we were thinking like, yeah, we want to work with this facade that kind of expresses the veins of wood, the kind of life that's ingrained within it. And this is just a cut off of one of the handrails that we were working on. And so we're kind of like working back and forth in scales. And we're thinking about how we could have this facade that was closed. Everybody's working on their computers in there, and so there's a light issue. So we said, okay, we'll actually have the windows behind these slats of wood and have just very few openings. And so depending on where you are, these openings can reveal themselves when you're looking at frontally, and that the wood has a kind of draping effect. So wood is incredibly malleable. You can do so many different things with it. And so how can it be solid and have that kind of stereometric quality to it, but also have this draping quality to it? So in terms of its construction, there's a concrete base. We worked with all kinds, concrete can't live without wood. They're two materials, they need each other. And so that's actually very beautiful. How can you work with this concrete, give it a kind of, keep the memory of its formwork, and try and come up with all the different ways that wood plays a role in the making of concrete. So that was also part of what we were looking to do, and that relationship between the wooden slats and the texture of that concrete then could work with those two materials together in a very kind of explicit way. The building has two structural cores. So one is in the center, one is the stair and elevator core, and it's CLT, and that came up first. And I'm just going to run through a series of images where you see the concrete base, and then the building starts to grow. Those the structural cores go in first, and then the walls go up, walls, slab, wall, slab, wall, slab. And so then they're not beautiful images. These are just from the construction site camera on the crane. And so you get to, the box building. It's a very generic kind of building. And then they come, the LVL, the LVL slats, I don't know what you would call them, they come already with their fasteners. And these fasteners have a really simple connection that's already on the facade, and so you could mount them really quickly. So you see here in this section, you see this is concrete, and then the concrete stops here. There's a grade change, so you can enter into the concrete base, and you see that in one of those first images, it's the lower concrete base, and then you're in this world of wood. And each horizontal slab is a different construction system. So we won the competition because we said your whole project is a showroom. And so as you take your customers, your suppliers through the building, you're seeing all the different ways in which wood can become structural or non-structural systems, and to kind of show off the versatility of the material. So here you see 4 of these reflected ceiling plans. They're all structural. Some are hybrid. There's 3 different ceilings or 2 different ceilings in them. And there's that relationship between wood and concrete and how they can really start to look the same. The wood, this is just a really cheap grade wood that if you sandblast it, the grain really comes out, and it gives you this beautiful texture on the wood, which is actually, that was a close-up of this wall back here. So as you enter in the building, it's not like just concrete versus wood, but there's a kind of symbiotic relationship to them. So I'm just going to go through a series of these images that give you an idea of the different kind of roofscapes that we were giving. They had the amazing thing about this was that they had the production facility next door. They were the gurus on wood, so we didn't know how any of this worked, and they would come up with, say, okay, let's just make our slab. This is them making their slab one by one, just nailing them together. And so then we could test out how to integrate the lighting. and really looking up close. These are acoustic little pockets that give an acoustic property to this floor slab. Again, working with this undulating, what's the minimum and maximum profile height of these structural elements, so that it also talks about the structural properties of the wood. And so here they're making them so that they're kind of prefabricated. So when they mount them, they're ready to go. So they mount them. This is the size of the piece that's going in, and then this is the effect that happens. And what happens is that if I go back here. All kinds of strength. When you start working with these these new systems, you need a fire. What you call this? The alarm. And that has to be at the lowest point of the ceiling. So we turned these kind of armatures that came out from. We found out there's a company just down the road that works with turning wood, and so they made all these apertures for these. Not these apertures, these extensions for all the things that needed to go in the ceiling, and we just kind of wedged them up between the wooden beams. So here I always wanted, at UVA there's a coffered ceiling. I was like, I want to do a coffered ceiling. And these are some of the drawings, and all of the beams that you see here are structural. And so it's a collaborating coffered ceiling in wood, and all of the mechanical, electrical systems are integrated into that, and so you see here, this is the lighting, and they have these acoustic panels, and around the acoustic panels is where the air is brought up. So it's all kind of hidden within the logic of the ceiling. We've gotten to the last floor, which was technically supposed to be the showroom. And so this space all of a sudden became this space open to possibilities. And this is a space now that's become an art venue. They have seminars for people interested in working on wood, but it's actually kind of become a place on the radar for all kinds of, cultural activities, so that you have this kind of empty space that is no longer dedicated only to the showroom. These are some of the shop drawings, the kind of mock-up of the honeycomb ceiling that we were interested in doing. These are the fasteners that are then hidden in the joints between the various pieces. This is looking up through the structural core of the stair. And you start to see how the stair was constructed. It's just a series of beams that are cantilevered off of the side of the structural walls with these mechanical fasteners. And then this is the kind of detail of those stairs, so that the construction industry-grade wood that has structural properties could also become a stair that, if you give it enough love and attention, it can be actually, much more. You can kind of elevate the industry-grade wood into something that you can just leave it how it is. So this is looking up into from the coffered ceiling up to the honeycomb ceiling, and you see that in the end, it's a very Baroque building on the inside, but in the end, it's still just part of the stockyard. And so this is something that the client to this day is really. People always say, "Oh, we'll just go to the wood box," and everybody knows it's the Damiani building, and it's the wood, the wood building. So that kind of how the wood can actually communicate, and so if you're working with a material, it can also, could also be a message about what it's containing within it. And in this next project, this is a recent project that we finished. We hadn't used wood in a long time. There's been kind of roller coaster ride in the use of wood. This is a hotel. It's in the UNESCO. This is the first time and probably the last time we're going to do a hotel. UNESCO World Heritage Site. Just stunning place. It's owned by the wife of the artist. But she had a competition. So it wasn't a direct invite. There was Snowetta and a whole bunch of people. She kind of was very ambitious about what kind of project she wanted to have. She comes from a lot of these hotels in our area, are family owned. She went, it was change of hands. She wanted to, renew the hotel and have a kind of new face to the hotel. So we're up on a high plateau. And it looks like we're kind of in the middle of nowhere, but that's not the case at all. In South Tyrol, there's an incredible infrastructure of skiing and trails, and it's a heavily settled landscape. The hotel that we're talking about was like this ugly duckling that had gone through, a number of changes, and we were wondering what on earth we were going to do with it. It was kind of like, this alpine, faux alpine vision of local architecture, which, with the infrastructure, marching past it for the ski lifts. And so we went back and did some, historical digging, and this is it was just a mountain hut. I guess you would call it a hut. That was actually much simpler, and it was her grandmother's, and so it was handed down through the generations. So we said, we need to just go back to simple and try to somehow make this ugly duckling into something that can hold its own in this incredible landscape. So this is the original hut, and then it was added on to over the years, and all kinds of bits and pieces were added to it. And we said, okay, let's just try and bring a kind of symmetry to this, and come up with this facade that can hold it all together. And we were interested in these columns that look kind of haphazard, and they kind of, if there's a cantilever, they reach out, or if there's something that's sagging, there's another part of the column that reaches out, and there's this kind of haphazard quality to it that we were interested in. It's also a covered area, and so we made a model of what we wanted to come up with, and this was before we had the project entirely. And then so here you see a detail of that facade, and so that ugly duckling is like buried within this gigantic order of these columns that hold together, that hold down this new single slope roof. There's incredible winds up there, so we wanted to work with a single pitch roof. So with the wind, of course, that can lift it off. So these columns are also working to hold it down. So you see that here in the landscape. And in this really ugly drawing, green is concrete existing, yellow was the roof, and the existing roof, and this is the new wooden. All we did was put a new roof on it, and kind of made it into a symmetrical configuration with these big columns that hold them all together. This is a shop drawing of the roof, and here you see the construction site. And I just thought it would be interesting to see, they would assemble them on the ground, and then they would lift them up, and they would just pull them over. Extremely, you can hear the wind. That's the view. They keep going, and then they're landing. They're landing into position. So this happened smack in the middle of COVID, and there was a real problem with the supply of materials. And so we had all these ideas before. Well, what kind of facade we're going to have? We're going to have it, thick and really have a kind of a very wood presence, and we were trying to avoid that kind of flatness. And all we had were planks, and they said, we've got planks, that's what we've got, so you can't really work outside of that. So we said, okay, so in section, this is just a wooden plank, and we said, what if it had teeth? Is there some way that with the material that we have, we can give it some teeth, and so that would give it a kind of thickness to it? And so we worked with the wood, the carpenters, and they said, okay, I think we can do that. And they fabricated this piece, and they said, okay, we can saw that. And so they would take the boards. It's not the greatest video. It's the only video I have. They take the boards. They had rigged it up. How it comes out, and that created this really beautiful surface that actually hid the fact that there are these planks, not planks, what are they called? They're boards, just one next to the other, and it creates a whole world of problems, like how do you turn the corner, which is what you see here, and how do you kind of allow for windows, and you start to striate and subtract some of those teeth, And then it creates this very particular kind of frame that you look out into this jagged landscape. It becomes your railing. It became like this obsessive detailing. Then it became an idea of the interiors, and it became this acoustic ceiling over the water in the swimming pool area. It became this series of cornices. The wax in the concrete wall is his Hubert. You met Hubert before. It's his installation. And we said, okay, let's work with these wood elements. They poured this concrete wall. It was supposed to be built much better. And we said, okay, well, let's just, kind of camouflage it with this series of frames around it. And then we inverted it, and it became a way that we could hold these acoustic panels of the roof, the interior roofing, what do you call it, the ceiling plane, the drop ceiling plane. It had a really low ceiling in this hotel, so we said, okay, we're going to revisit. There's this thing in the family kind of traditional in the farmhouses, they call it the stube, and where you have your fireplace and you kind of gather, and they have these wood-paneled ceilings. And so we revisited that, or just even the way in which the curtains were held behind. It became this detail that from the facade, it became this way to kind of put all together the materials within the hotel. It's very colorful, joyful. I like color. So from there, we were working. What time is that? It's 6:30. When did I start? An hour left. Okay, we're good. So fast forward 10 years, and there's this architect who passed away 2010. We call him our little Le Corbusier, our little Corb. And he left behind this incredible patrimony of buildings in South Tyrol. He's not known, and he's just extremely local. And but he's a treasure trove for us. And there were two competitions that were held. This is Bressanone. This is the historical city center. This is the Bishop's Palace, the Bishop's Garden. Our office is off just right here, and I live here. And there was this. So there are these two competitions. One was to demolish one of his buildings. It was a tourist information center, and one which is considered like his opus magnum, his masterpiece, was to renovate it and bring it up to code and do a series of things with it. So on the one hand, front headlines of the newspaper, MoDusArchitects is demolishing Ottmar Barth, and then on the other hand, we were in a completely different position where we were trying to kind of elevate his work. Of course, as architects, it's a competition, and we participate, and if you win, then you're the villain, but when you're demolishing his work. So with that being said, this is Ottmar Barth. So these were going on at the same time. And the interesting thing is, with the Visitors Information Center, it's a building that it's on a sliver of a site. And at its point, there has always been a series of pavilions that have been there to welcome visitors. So through the ages, this is the Habsburg age, the fascist period, and then this is the Ottmar Barth building. It looks really terrible here. It kind of was a terrible building, and that each one replaced the other one. So there's this idea of depending on where you are in history, this notion of what is this small pavilion going to be for those who are greeting and for those who are arriving in Bressanone, and what kind of message do you want to send? And so we studied his project, where it was sited. So these are these two roads that come together, and then you would go straight into the historical city center. And what was interesting, you don't see it that well, but there are these trees on the site. Here he had it drawn. You can see it a little bit better here. And he had his pavilion at the point of this site. And so we said, okay, let's model this really quickly. Behind you have the Bishop's Palace, which is like one of the landmark buildings of our little town of Bressanone. And we said, actually the thing that's been there the longest, one of the elements that has been there the longest is the tree, or there are two trees in particular. So these have a kind of historical resonance to it. And there's something about the placement of this building that's kind of very far forward that made it a pressure point in this small town. So we said, okay, first move, we're going to do something with the tree. These are very quick study models that we make, just like 5-minute study models or paper models. And we said, okay, we're going to do something with the tree. And so if you just keep your eye on the tree, you see all the different, here it's very jagged, and then it's up on legs, and then there's lots of legs, it's moving back and forth, and then it's crouching really low, and then it's getting a little bit higher, and then it's kind of starting to get its form, and then we build it at a bigger scale, and we start to try and study those proportions a little bit better. But the gist of it is that, okay, there's something about the tree, and engaging that tree in a way that then you pull back from the tip of this site. And if you look at some of the historical documents of Bressanone, of course, there's always the bishop's palace. It used to be the seat of the bishop for a number of years. And so the bishop's palace, is the centerpiece of a lot of engravings. And part of, in the 1800s, there was this kind of, interest in the exotic. And so they would bring these exotic elements into some of their garden landscaping elements. And in this case, with the bishop's palace, they had this garden. And along the medieval walls, they installed they built these 2 pavilions. You only see one here. And one was Japanese, and one was Chinese. And we said, actually, that's something very interesting to us about this site, that why don't we think of it less as a building, but one as a sibling to these other 2 pavilions that has, kind of exotic. I mean, exotic's not the right word. It's other. There's an otherness to it. And that if we just pull it away from the tip of the site, that will create a little mini public space. And that's why we won the competition, basically, just because everybody built on top of the footprint of the existing building, and all we did was pull it back and create a little mini space. So it's a very small project. It has had a huge impact on our little town. So here you see some images of that. We wanted to open up the groundscape so that you could have more of a connection as you're coming in through the main road, that you see the bishop's palace behind you. And that there's this, the bishop's palace is very Baroque. It's got, all the kind of frou-frou accoutrements and colors to it. And so even though you're working with concrete, there's a kind of sinuous quality to it that is meant to be in dialogue with this Baroque building behind it. And as we call it the tree hugger. So, I mean, it's a bit of a one-liner, but, it's this building that hugs the tree and kind of opens up this ground plane and lifts itself off the ground, and trying to give as much space to all kinds of things that actually happen here. There's the bus stop. The big buses with tourists come in, and this has now become their stopping point. They have festivals, so they use this wall as ways, and there's video installations that have been commissioned specifically for this wall. That it's been this whole starting point for a number of projects that have become important annual events for the city of Bressanone. The plan is really very simple. This is the underground space with the roots. You enter, this is the covered area. You enter through here. There's your front desk kind of, engagement with the tourist information people. There's some offices, and there are other offices up above. And this has a geometry, just quite simple, of some circles put together. But that geometry requires some kind of gymnastics to get the formwork going. And we wanted to make sure that this is the first time we had done an all exposed concrete building. And we wanted to make sure that you don't see the slab. So, usually you build a wall and you put the slab on top, and then you build another wall. And so you always see the slab as part of your facade. And then usually it's covered over. And so since we're working with exposed concrete, we said, okay, my goodness, but we'd like to have a continuous facade. So we worked with a construction company that were absolutely amazing. And they, basically had to pour and hang these walls without the slab. So there's a lot of muscle that goes into these walls. There's a lot of rebar. This is a sketch that the construction company sent us, and their idea about the formwork that was going to go into this. And they closed down this street, which was part of another whole conversation that we had with the city, because we said, what if these don't become the main inroads and they're 30, they call it 30 zone, so 30 kilometers per hour, you go slower, so pedestrians and cars can mix a little bit more easily. So we said, let's just close down the road and see what happens, like how do people respond to one of the main roads being closed off. There's different ways you can get into town. And then we'll use that as our way to set up our formwork, because it was kind of a problem of the construction site being right smack in the middle of town. So you see here how they're propping up the formwork, and they're taking them off, and all the windows are the same. And the construction company came up with this idea of how to make these jigs so they can use always the same jig for each window. And here you see they're not quite in sequence. Here you see how they're laying out the formwork, getting it ready. So this one's already been cast. I guess they've gone all the way around by now, and so they're holding up the walls. There's still no floor yet, and then we had to protect the roots, and this was the most. I was terrified that we're going to build this building and then the tree dies. I was like, that would be great. We suffocated the tree. And so you see some of the images of just trying to get that formwork just standing up on its own. So it had to be propped up. And here you see the jigs that they use. So, they had these two parts. So they insert it, and it's notched together like this. And then they pull it apart, and they fix it. And then that becomes the formwork for the window. And so that's why all the windows are exactly the same. So here we have the formwork going in for the floor. These are the two eyes. This beautiful drawing that we did not do, but it gives you an idea of the construction of this wall. And that, here's a thermal bridge. There are these big, the floor is hung from the walls. And that's actually a very complicated detail. And that's a thermal bridge. It's a structural problem. How do you get the fasteners cast in there, and then how do you reveal them and connect them up and make it in such a way that the ceiling is hung? So these are the fasteners that are embedded within the walls, and you can see how they're. Where do you see it? Here. You see how they're putting it in the rebar, and then you see them here. Okay, the ceiling. You see them here. And then you have to uncover them, fix the other fastener, and then these are going to be held. This is, we're looking at the formwork that would be holding up the floor. And it's just so fascinating. It was really fascinating. So here they're working on the rebar of the floor. And, of course, then with the concrete, concrete, if you're Tedando, you can have these beautiful polished surfaces and everything is working perfectly. But, concrete, it's very, there's a recipe. We worked with the concrete company on what that recipe was. There's a huge amount of aggregate that is in excess in our area now because they're digging this massive tunnel from north to south where all the trucks are going to go. So we worked with all of this various local aggregate that's coming out of that dig. And this poor guy, we didn't think about, what do you call it? I call it bush hammering. That's not the right word. When you're giving polish, yeah, maybe polishing. And so you take off with this, you take off that top layer that's smooth, and then you get the aggregates to come out, and it gives you kind of texture to the wall. So here you can see where it's textured and where it's not, and that texturing has a kind of, it's in dialogue with the tree that we, are thinking that we might be suffocating, but the bark of that tree, it has a kind of texture to it. It peels off, and you see what's behind that layer. And so that was something that we were working with in the concrete work. So here are just some images. There's that covered walkway, so when it's raining, a lot of people can kind of hang out there before they move on. We did all of the furniture. And then there's that connection between along the street, walking along the offices, and you see the Bishop's Palace on the side. So then we were working, so at the same time, this was where we had demolished the Otmar Art Building, and then we started working on the Cusanis Academy, which is this building that's considered his kind of, like I said, his masterpiece. It's a building that it was built in the 1960s, and it's an addition to, it was commissioned by a religious institution. It's an addition to a seminary building that you see here. There were 3 existing buildings. This one was demolished. His building was put in, and then these 3 became the academy. And it's an academy that's dedicated to like the religious world coming in contact with the non-religious world, and they have a lot of seminars. It's a kind of long life learning institute. And this building, if you see it from the outside, is bare bones. It was a total scandal when it was built because, you know, another Baroque centerpiece of the seminary building. And this was bare bones, regular brick and a concrete frame, all exposed. And what's really interesting about this building that it's incorrigible. You can't. There's no getting out of that structural. The pass of the structural grid and the brick. They have a logic to it. There's a rhythm. There's a dimension. It's modular. And if you're trying to intervene in that, you really have to fall within this measure of these materials. The 2 things that the client asked for was, one, they wanted to create more of an access point with the community. There was this fire stair that was put in this kind of abandoned courtyard space between the main building and those, I said there are 3 buildings that kind of triangulate. And so here you see an image of that access that we kind of cleared up and created this ramp that would help you walk through this access point, which you understand a little bit better here. So this is Otmar Barth's kind of building that we'll get into a little bit more here. And there's 1, 2, 3 buildings, and this is that courtyard space where we put in the skylight that brings light into this conference room below. Because on top of this, while we started working on the project, it became a listed property. It's the first modern building that was listed by the Heritage Department. And we had, you know, all our drawing set, and we had buildings that were outside of the ground that were additional conference rooms that were, you know, the request of the client that were so that you could have more people going to seminars. And they said, oh, no, everything's great. Only problem is you can't see anything. We don't want anything to be seen. So we said, okay, well, what do you mean by that? Oh, just, you don't have to, you know, what you build, you just can't see it. I'm like, oh, okay, that kind of makes a difference. And so that became, though, a starting point of an idea. And we said, you know, this idea of continuity with the existing, a lot of times you see these beautiful projects. It's like old and new, you know, like Corten, steel, and stone. And we thought, what would happen if you tried to really work in a more seamless way and you weren't sure what was existing and what was new? And so we rethought the project, and we started looking more in depth about how you could intervene within this brick and concrete framework. So I'll show you a series of drawings, not to get into the floor plan of the project, but just to give you an idea of the amount of intervention. So red is new, and the black is existing. So we had to intervene at the foundations of this existing building. We put in a large seminar space underneath. The axis that you saw before became an underground axis that connected to some of the existing rooms below. And so in section, the project, in order for not to be seen, it was really important to insert a new vertical core and connect these existing facilities with this new kind of underground bunker facility. So here you have some images of that site. It's very scary to excavate next to foundations, and it was something that we were there on site every day, and I was just totally worried about, you know, the building settling and so on and so forth. So just to give you an idea of like how much of this building was torn out. So this is the main vertical stair that it's really hard to understand this project because it's kind of convoluted, but there's this vertical, we needed one major vertical circulation. So we gutted out this area. And so, you know, you're changing the paths of these, of the bricks. And we mocked up this, you know, we made this model to try and figure out how that could work in relationship to the existing facade. Here you see some images of that. And this is the passage that we made that axis underground. You see in that section line here. So this is that underground passage that became the way which the vertical stair is here, and you connect up between existing and new down below. So these are just some of the images of those spaces that were either existing or not. And here it's not quite, you're not supposed to, there's a kind of idea of continuity of these spaces. Instead of saying, oh, look, this is existing building, and here we are, us architects, this is our intervention. It was trying to really have a very organic relationship between existing and new. So this is the underground space, the conference room that we were working on. The clients were really worried about the underground space. They didn't want a dark dungeon. So this idea of how you bring light into that space to have this very, ephemeral light quality to it. So these are some images of that. We studied this interior facade as if it was an outdoor facade, and to try and make it a very special space, and that when you were inside that space, you could also look outside and see people passing through in the hallway. So this is the ground level. So yellow is demolished and red is new. So it was very, punctual, the intervention. This is an image of the existing. They wanted an urban access that connected it to the community, but they also wanted an access that made it more, you were able to orient yourself better within the building. So then we cleared the whole thing out, and we made this much wider corridor. We opened up this throughway up to the cafeteria so that there's light at the end of this passageway. And we opened up these big window walls to let light into this modified conference room. And this is the amount of, it completely had to be gutted out. And so all of the existing materials had to be, there was an inventory of these materials, each and every stone, paver. They were numbered, they were taken off site and held and then reassembled back on the site. And so like I said, that structural pass of the concrete, but also of the brick, this is a new aperture that we put in here. So we found the closest brick that we could to the existing. Its dimension had to be exactly correct, and then we kind of sutured it together to create these spaces. So why the building is so beautiful is this incredible space on the second floor. You have like this piano nobile space, and it's this, Ottmar Barth, he worked for a period, we found out, in Rome with the engineer Nervi. And so he had this incredible capacity to work with formwork and really bring out the plasticity of concrete and a way that it sculpts the light, and that he would mix high and low materials. So you have travertine, you have a black stone, and you have these pavers that you find in Italy in like these 1970s, 80s bathrooms in like some cheap hotel or something. And he managed to like cobble all of these materials together. This was white, he had painted these white. So what did we do in this space? I mean, it's beautiful. What are you gonna do? We had to bring it up to code, so little things like we had to lift up the parapet height, and on the other side of this, it was all acoustic panels. And this became these channels for the projector is down here for events, and we use these as like an infrastructure for cables. We inserted lights. There was these cables that went up through this beam here, and we opened up this wall in the back so that there was a kind of continuity of this space to the space beyond before it was all closed up. A lot of the work we did was just cleaning out all the stuff that, slowly in the 1970s, 80s, the 90s, you can imagine how much stuff kind of gets collected, kind of cleaning it up and going back to the original. We went to the archival collection of Ottmar Barth. He just had an incredible amount of drawings that we went through to really understand what was original and what was not. So these are some of these images of these rooms that look onto each other, and this gives you an idea of what we found, and just trying to give it back its material qualities, so that that when you walk through these spaces, it really is that bare-faced concrete filled in with masonry, and that's what is giving you these spaces that aren't anything but standard. So some images that show you that all the furniture was designed by him. We put, these are acoustic elements. These are panels that open and close for the audio for the translators that sit back there. I don't remember, what is the room called there? Up there. So yeah, there's a real, when you're working on an existing building that has a logic to it, it's kind of like your doctor. You really have to know your patient. And even though we had all of these drawings, we went back there repeatedly, just measuring every break in the grout and understanding the structural paths of this project to try and intervene with working with a very limited set of materials so that nothing just jumped out at you. We reused a lot of the veneer that, not reused, we went back and found the original veneer that he used, the coloring. He used linoleum floors with laminate, this Tanganyika veneer that's really ugly. If you see it anywhere else, it's really ugly. And reworked it so that it kind of could show that what was there was enough, because there was this interest in saying, oh look, we need to upgrade our hotel rooms, and they need to be much more inviting to the level of tourism in our area has just skyrocketed, and the kind of quality of each hotel room has to be everyone's upping each other. But we said, it has a monastic quality to these rooms, and let's just use the same blue linoleum that he was working with and the same kind of palette of colors, and that's enough, because we have these bricks that are there and the concrete framework, and that's really what's giving the quality of these spaces. So there's that relationship of the seminary to the existing building. So as Jason mentioned, we do a lot of schools, and one of the, this is the first big competition that we won. It was a 20 million euro project, and we had never built anything in our life. So you can see that there was a master plan for this school district that was going to be at the center of this expansion zone, and there's two buildings. One had a curvy footprint, and one had a rectilinear footprint. One was for 0 through 6, and one was elementary school. And so we had to keep that kind of footprint. And in terms of the elementary school, we had just been to Holland, and my brick fetish just didn't go away. And so I said, gosh, these bricks are beautiful, and they have this contrasting, working with dark bricks and these white windows. And so this building, it happened right after that trip. And I said, we've got to do a brick building. And there's something about, it's not just about doing a brick building. There's something about schools that the way that the codes are written, the way that you're programmed to think about schools, that everything has to be standardized, and that the schools fit into that category of non-places. So it's like if you go to one school, all the schools are the same. There's a classroom, there's the chipboard, there's the railings that all look the same. And there's something about these spaces that as time has gone on, they just become more and more impoverished by the kind of materials that they're, they have to be up to, just like for formaldehyde emissions, there's only certain kind of materials that you can use. I mean, it's really it's almost like a hospital. And so this is something that I haven't stopped thinking about when we started working on schools. We said, why is it that these kids have to spend their lives in these really standardized spaces that could be anywhere? And there's nothing about these spaces that are really going to be part of, how much time do you spend in classrooms? And how much of your life do you spend in those classrooms? And so I was like, these spaces have to have a kind of impact that's visceral, that when you go into this school, you can feel it. There's something about the way the things that, as you walk across the floor, that how sound reflects, that's going to tell you about the materiality of the building. And because these are, I don't know if you remember the schools that you went to, it's something you don't forget. There's certain, your schooling in that building is emblazoned in your mind because you spent a lot of time there. Anyway, so that's why we were really into, and the other thing, they take a lot of wear and tear. Schools look old really fast. So you're using all these materials that are very flat. You never have a big budget for schools. You have to be very careful about public spending public funds. And so we tried to find all the ways in which we could cut down on budget and really invest in the materiality of these schools. So, exposed concrete, working with wood frames, working with these brick facades that had a sheen to them, so that the way that the light hits them, that they could reflect. And these black bricks actually become white depending on the time of day, so that your facade is alive, and so that when you're outside, you're not just in another dreary building in this school that you're imprisoned in, but it's something that, it also talks about the weather. And talking about the weather, the other thing with schools that I was just totally shocked about is that nobody wants to let the kids out when it's raining, because then they get muddy and then the school gets all dirty. And so kids' days are dictated by, oh gosh, it's raining, that means we don't have recess. And it really impacts how they live their day, just because if it's raining. So we said, okay, it's really important that we create these spaces that are covered, and they can become these outdoor spaces. So for us, there's this, we're really interested in cantilevers, and that the projects have a structural resolution to them that allows you to lift the building off of the ground, but also have a kind of gravity to it. So working with brick, this was also another, I guess you would call it, narrative that was going on in the project that we were really interested in. And so that this space was like an outdoor room that you could, even if it was raining, there's no excuse, you could go out and still play. So the idea of the life of these materials and the kind of structural solutions can give you a new life to these buildings, so that the way in which the cadence of your day can be changed by those choices that you make as an architect. So as the last project, this is a project that we finished, I'm not sure when, last year or the year before, and it was a competition. It's a private house, and private houses can be really tricky because anything goes, what the client wants and what they're interested in. But with a competition, you come with a project and they choose that project. And we were really interested in this idea of presence, and presence isn't the right word, this idea of a house as if it had already been there for a long time. And of course, nobody wants an old house. They're not asking an architect to build them a new house and then you give them an old house. But this idea that the house is already rooted, that it doesn't feel new when you first move in there. And so we started thinking about a brick-faced house. Okay, it's a brick-faced house. I would like to do an all brick. This is my next project. But we were interested in how with bricks that there's this idea of the ground, the sedimentation of the ground, and how that could become a kind of tectonic and aesthetic to the overall feeling of the house. So here you see the house is located on an elongated piece of property, and we pushed it back up against the northern edge to have this kind of tail of garden before it, and really anchor the house into the ground, working with a palette of bricks that was like an epic story of trying to find the right brick company, trying to find the right recipe. How do you tell a bricklayer to say, oh, a little white here and a little brown here and a little black here? It was actually very complicated to get that kind of patina and sedimentation over time, that it didn't look like all the bricks were the same, or it wasn't too designy with like a patterning to it, or it's like, okay, here's my dark coursing, and here, we wanted to have a kind of softening of time. Here are some sketches. This is a really fast way of working. We're trying to work with a house that was had a right angle, but also working with the curved line. And so again, some of our really quick paper models are insulation. In Italian, it's isolation. In English, it's insulation. And so just cutting them out and trying to come up with a formal strategy to this house. Matteo and I had been to an Ellsworth Kelly exhibition that was one of those random moments in our lives that kind of constellate an experience that changes you. And this Ellsworth Kelly exhibit that we went to when we were in grad school together. And we would always come back to this imperfect curve and how it creates these two figures. And that became the kind of inspiration for the formal strategy of the house that then we started working with in Model even more. So from that original Belden brick was the brick that just came into my mind right now when I was on the Muschenheim Fellowship. And we started touring some brick companies in northern Italy. Brick is not a local material in South Tyrol. It actually has some political baggage to it. In fact, I didn't mention this, but when we did the school project, the province said that we couldn't do a brick building because there's the fascist period where a lot of the buildings were made of brick. And so this idea of working with a material that had that political baggage to it, they were really concerned about what kind of message that was going to be. And so I don't know if I would fight that battle anymore because that's a very prickly path. But we said that, you know, there's a lot of different kinds of bricks and, you know, materials, all materials have a, you know, there's a lot of different ways you can cull political statements through materials. And it's just too convenient to, you know, say bricks equals fascist. There's a lot of things that have come out of fascism that is not just brick architecture. So we had a long path of divorcing them of that idea. And we ended up building, anyway, that's an aside. So we went, you know, I have a love of understanding how things are made. And I think in general, architects, that's something that we all share. And so being able to visit companies that are producing these materials and seeing the processes that they go through, and from clay and the sand and how they're mixed together, whether they're industrialized or this is a company that we ended up working with, Sant Anselmo, that they also work by hand. And so there's an irregularity. We were interested in these bricks that were very irregular, which are very difficult actually to lay and keep the coursing straight. And so that was one thing. But the other thing that I was always really interested in is how I showed this image to the clients, and I said, I think your house should be this. And they're like, what? I said, there's something about this image. It's a Magritte. I mean, I didn't tell them it was a Magritte, but I said, you know, it's day and night at the same time. And in your house, you will be living not just day and night, but all the things that you might do in the morning or in the evening happen at different moments. And that a house can be both set against a blue sky, but you have the light on at the same time, this overlap of time, and this juxtaposition of two things that you actually could never have at the same time was something that I was interested in doing in this house. So it's a house that's new, but it's going to look like and feel like you've already lived in it, and it's like part of your skin. And how do you get that kind of aging? How do you design that weathering as a kind of aesthetic? And so brick for us was something that was really interesting to work with to do that. And then there was the Ellsworth Kelly, and then all the kind of, I still find bricks around our yard. I just have we collected so many bricks. We tried so many different mock-ups, and working with reclaimed ceramic tiles for the roof, and trying to kind of come up with your palette. And so this is the facade that we presented to the client, and we said, okay, this is how your building's going to look. It's going to be it's going to have a kind of body to it, and we're going to be working with these steel profiles that are going to be used structurally, but also in a kind of decorative way. And so after a lot of trial and error, we were able to have that kind of tautness that brick can give you to a facade from afar, and it gives you a kind of weightiness to it, but as you get closer, it's actually really irregular, and that there's this idea of being weighted to the ground, so the darker colors move up into lighter colors, and that's also an idea of all the interiors that we took into the development of the project. So here you'll see some images of that moving around the house that opens towards the south, and that the brick is brought into your interior spaces so that it's not just an outside veneer, but it's something that will become part of your daily life. So these are some images of that brick and how we're trying to pull it out and lighten it as it went up towards the sky. This is the entryway to the house. It's this acid wash metal panels. And there's some of, just the regular kind of brise-soleil. It's very simple how you can open it up and make the wall become more transparent. And then when you come on the inside, it's a very joyful house. The clients one's a designer, one's in the shoe industry. And so we wanted a house that was kind of full of life, that, you walk into this brick envelope and then you come into this world of all kinds of materials. So one of these was this kind of centerpiece is this stair that we mocked up with a 1 to 10 scale model. I always remember that Zumthor, he taught a studio when I was at GC. I didn't take it, and he was like, 1 to 10 is the model you need to get the right lighting and the right material quality. So I'm like, we need a 1 to 10 model of this stair. And so we did. We mocked it up, and we said, okay, let's work with the designer. She works also in the shoe industry, and so there's lots of laces and stuff. So we mocked up that stair, and she helped build it, and you see some of those images here. So everything in this house has a story. This is the chimney. Could talk about that for a long time, but there's a kind of organic bump in the wall that becomes your chimney, but it's also really technological. This chimney, there's a lot of, technology that goes into these pieces. So the plan, this is the underground. There's more garage than there is house, and then you come up. It's a much smaller house, and the in-laws live on this end of it. So it's actually a 2-family house, and there's a double height space at its center. And so just to finish out, there's a series of images that go from earthy tones to like the darker tones, and working with all kinds of natural materials for the plaster work, the terrazzo, all of the recipes. We hand design them with the craftsmen that were working on them, the embedded pavers, and the kind of grout that you can use, that you can still wash and still have a kind of sealant on these, and to have this kind of curvilinear world underneath. I convinced her to buy the sculpture that I've been looking at the sculptor for like 20 years. I said, this sculptor needs to have his work here. And she did. She bought it. And so this is her workspace. So there's ways that we bring in light into the house. There's all kinds of nooks and crannies. And then as you go up further into the house, this is the Laza stone. Because we talked about this. I was at Tennessee Marble, and the owner, I was like, well, do you know Laza stone? She goes, yes, of course, and that's local to our area. So anyway, so these are just some images of how we were working with putting the palette together with the 4 tones of the brick, the recycled ceramic roofing, the metal elements, the pavers, the tonal qualities, the terrazzo floor, and then trying to build up your palette from there with the wood, and then as it becomes lighter and lighter, the glass, and there's mother of pearl in this plaster work. And with that, I have finished.
Thank you so much. I think we will give time for a couple of questions. So, and I will walk the microphone to the people who would like to ask those couple of questions so that we can record this. Yes, coming your way. This is the Phil Donahue that I watched when I was younger. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandy. That was really fantastic, really wonderful. So a question about winning these through competition and yet describing to us and sharing with us so much exploration of collaboration with makers and experiences of materials rather than naming them. How does one think about preparing a competition entry when experience is so much a part of what you're offering, but not able to deliver in that format?
Yeah, that's so with our competitions, we just try to win them. It's not a joke. We just try to win them. We try like, okay, what is the strategy that needs to? There's some basic design moves that need to happen that are kind of irregardless of the material properties that you might be thinking of. So a lot of times, maybe in your mind, you have, you're interested in working in a concrete building. For example, the Tourist Information Office, we're like, gosh, we haven't done an exposed concrete building. This would be really interesting to work with these organic forms. It would be the kind of perfect match. But we didn't present that in the competition. So because, exposed concrete building, I'm not sure how that would go over. So a lot of times competition for us is just strategy. Like, what is a strategy that can set you apart from your competitors? And so it's true. It that's why renders have become really important, because they give an idea of materiality and spatial qualities. But they can also be very deceiving. And so we try to make models and then photograph those models to just at least give a sense of scale and proportion. But we often only get through materials when we have to kind of do a facade that we try to avoid at all costs until you actually have to design it. But it's true that material in competitions on our competition boards, there a lot of times it's not there.
Can you add to that a little bit about the context of competitions where you're working, which I think is very different than the context of the U.S.?
Yeah.
Just say a little bit about a competition and how you get work through that venue.
Yeah, without competitions, I'm not sure where we would be today, because Matteo, when we went to school together, he graduated a year before, and he's like, I'm out of here, because how do you start an office if you don't have experience? And so with the competitions in our area, it was open to anyone. So all you had to do was participate in the competition, and you either win it or lose it. There's money attached to the prizes. So let's say you place fourth, but you're still going to get, I don't know, a certain sum of money that will help offset those costs. But competitions are it's a level playing field. So it's not who you are or what you've done, it's the project. And the benefits to that, I mean, you see all of this, but we've lost a lot of competitions. We don't spend more than 3 to 4 weeks on a competition because it's just not economically sustainable. So the idea has to be fast. It's not overthought. It's not like, we haven't thought through everything, but it's just a strategy. And there's been a kind of ripple effect. So all public work have to, by law, go through the competition in our area, go through the competition format of bidding out projects. And then there was this trickle-down effect. So companies said, oh, gosh, that's actually a very effective way. I can have 5 projects for a very low cost, unfortunately, and decide from the project. Maybe I don't know exactly what I'm looking for. I'll hold a competition. I'll write a brief, and I'll see what I get, and then I'll choose a project. And so, and then that's also happened to all of our house projects have been competitions. So even down to the private scale. And what's really, I think, actually very helpful as an architect is that the project wins. So then when you start a project, you're not starting a conversation from zero. You already have a project in hand. So let's say it's a school project. There's all kinds of stakeholders in city and regional and codes and I don't know what. But it's all centered around a project that's already there. And so actually the process goes a little bit faster. There has to already be consensus because that's your project. And then from there, you can start a dialogue about something that's real. You don't have to start from scratch. But the project brief has to be really well written. And there's a whole backlog of people who do that and processes that might be participatory or not. That's really important. And the jury is fundamental. The chapter of architects in our area, they make sure that there's enough architects on each jury, and they're handpicked. and then you have all the stakeholders. But there's always an architect deciding on that jury, at least two.
Other questions?
You guys have stayed on long. I'm
Okay, well,
thankful.
we'll leave it there. Sandy, thank you so much. Thank you for your work and for sharing it. And thank all of you for coming, and
Yeah,
have a
thank
great
you.
evening.
Yeah,
We'll
thanks for
pick it
coming.
up tomorrow. Take the rest of the day off. Some of you.